what it was. You already know who it is, and you're tuned in with priceless knowledge of self. And this right here, this is the astrology behind the fight for the undisputed super middleweight championship of the world between Jermell, Iron Man Charlo, who just so happens to be the undisputed junior middleweight champion, and Saul Canelo Alvarez, the undisputed super middleweight champion of the world. And not only is this undisputed versus undisputed, these just so happen to be two of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters on earth. So it's going down. And this will be occurring on Saturday, September 30th. So, what I'm going to do is tell you who the stars favor. But before I can do that, on the actual night in question, what I'm going to do first is tell you a little bit about these dudes individually. So we're going to look at Charlo first. We're going to look at his physical attributes. We're going to look at his professional accomplishments. And then we're going to look at his natal chart. And then we're going to go to Canelo. And we're going to assess Canelo. We're going to look at his physical attributes. We're going to look at his professional accomplishments. And then we're going to look at his natal chart. And then after that, together, we're going to determine who has the better chart for a fighter. And then going from there, we're going to address the night in question. And we're going to look at all of the astrological transits occurring that night. And then we're going to derive a point system. And we're going to see which planetary transit favors which fighter. And by the time we're done, we'll know who the stars favor. And you can place your bets on that, if anything else. All right. So, without further ado, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. So, when it comes to Jermell, Iron Man Charlo, the first thing you have to mention with him is he's a twin. And he's going to hate that about himself, but it's the truth. Because this opportunity was actually afforded to his brother first. But his brother is having some mental health issues and some personal problems. So he couldn't step up to the plate. But they kept that opportunity in the family. And this is not a step down in competition. Don't get that twisted. Because Jermell is actually considered the better fighter. Even though Jermell has a better record, Jermell has a better resume. And he's an overall more stable person. And that's funny seeing that they're both Tauruses. But we'll talk about that in a second. But Jermell usually fights at the 154-pound division. And that's where he is an undisputed champion at the moment. And you can call that super welterweight or junior middleweight. It's up to you. And then he's also won a belt at the welterweight division. So he's a 2-division world champion. And he boasts a boxing record of 35 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw. But it is also worth noting that when it comes to his draw and his loss, he has avenged both. When it comes to Castano, who he had the draw with, he came back and knocked him the fuck out. When it comes to Tony Harrison, who he lost to, and that was a controversial loss, by the way, he came back and knocked him the fuck out too. So, don't get it twisted. Jermell Charlo is a bad motherfucker. And he stands at 5'11". He has a 73-inch arm reach. He walks around at about 180 pounds, but he fights at 154. But this fight is occurring at 168 pounds. So he's not going to have to drop that much weight, but he's not used to fighting at this weight class. So this could slow him down. But it could also make him feel more natural in there. It all depends on what happens on that night. And it is also worth noting that even though he fights at a lower weight class, he is not the smaller man here. He is actually much larger than Canelo in stature. All right? So, when it comes to his astrology, this is where it gets good. He has his sun at 28 degrees of Taurus in his 10th house. So the sun is ego and purpose. The 10th house is the house of career and status and reputation and public image and ambition. So, he's about something in life. And with it being in Taurus, he's about money. He's about stability, security. That's what he needs for ego satisfaction. All right. And his sun is trine to his Saturn, which is in Capricorn in his 6th house. So he has a very strict routine. He's a very serious dude. He is extremely health conscious. He has a very, very hard work ethic. He don't play no games. And that helps him be successful. But he can't stress himself out and overwork himself. And that can cause some health issues. But this dude right here will outwork you. Now, where it gets interesting is his moon is at 22 degrees of Pisces in his 8th house. So he feels everything. He is incredibly sensitive. Take it from a Pisces moon myself. Oh, man. He picks up from a whole realm of influences, whether it be the environment or other people's moods and emotions. And that can affect him. But with this being in the 8th house, he feels it extremely deep. So deep that he's going to need some type of outlet. And he isolates himself because he feels so much. And man, his moon is conjunct to his Mars and sextile to his Saturn and trine to his midheaven, I believe. No, his Lilith. It's trine to his Lilith, pardon me. And so, with the moon conjunct to Mars, even in Pisces, he's about that shit. He's brave. He's willing to stand up and fight for whatever he feels. And he feels a lot. Matter of fact, he spends too much time fighting about stuff that he feels because sometimes it has nothing to do with him. He's picking up on some more shit. But with this sextile to his Saturn, he can calm himself down. He can chill out. But in doing that right there can create some depression inside of him because he's bottling it up, which creates some health issues. But he could also employ it. He can work it out. Now with it trying his Lilith in Scorpio in his 4th house, that means he's went through some shit in his life that he doesn't speak on. And we'll touch more on that in a second. Now, his ascendant is at 13 degrees of Leo. And that's funny because him and his brother have this saying, lions only. And I don't think they even know they're Leo ascendants. But that's where that comes from. And that just means he's a confident person. He's a picture of confidence. But drama follows him wherever he goes. The ascendant is going to be reflective of our personality in a way. It's the vehicle that carries us around wherever we need to go. All right. Now, that brings us to Mercury. And Mercury is your mindset and your communication skills and your ability to adjust. And his Mercury is at 8 degrees of Taurus in his 9th house. So he really doesn't enjoy making adjustments. But he is very sensitive. And he listens way more than he speaks. And that actually helps him be successful. And that's how he learns so much. But he does have a stubborn mindset. And the sight and sound and touch and smell and taste of things is very important to him. And he doesn't like to deviate from the norm. And if something has worked in the past, that's usually sufficient reason for him to keep on doing it. And he only adjusts when he has to. And even that is begrudgingly. Now, his Mercury is sextile to his Jupiter, trine to Uranus, square to his North Node, and conjunct his midheaven. Matter of fact, his Mercury is his midheaven. And what's cool about that is he is involved in design with this being Taurus. That's another avenue of prosperity for him. he has a sponsorship with Balenciaga. And so with that Taurus influence there, that's how that comes in the mix. And he's very business savvy. And he's always thinking of ways for him to prosper. And he's a lot more popular overseas than he is here. All right, and he's not necessarily quick, but once he picks something up, it ain't going nowhere. I mean, nowhere. Now, his Venus is at 17 degrees of Aries in his 9th house, and Venus is our love nature. It's what we aspire for in life as good or beautiful. It's our sense of affection. It's also how we achieve balance and harmony in our life. And with Venus in Aries in the 9th house, he's impulsive. He's quick to jump into situations. He knows what he wants and he's willing to go after it, but sometimes that scares people away. He's very direct. He likes to shoot his shot. He likes to make the first move, and he's the pioneer in those situations. All right. And that don't have anything to do with the fight, but it is interesting. Now, his Mars. And the Mars is going to be our fighting style. It's our inherent sense of determination. It's our drive. It's our energy. It's our passion. So this is going to be one of the most important things. His Mars is at 21 degrees of Pisces in his 8th house. And man, he makes everything more complicated on himself than it has to be. But if he can get into a rhythm, he goes into God mode. And his footwork is exquisite. I mean, absolutely exquisite. And he's slick. And his movement, divine. Now, his Mars is sextile to Saturn and trine to Lilith too. Because whatever's going on with his moon is going to be going on with his Mars. So, with his Mars sextile to Saturn, he is a perfectionist. And sometimes that can slow him down. But, once again, like I say, if he can take his time and get into the appropriate rhythm, he goes into God mode. Now, his Jupiter is at 10 degrees of Cancer in the 11th house. And Jupiter is our values, but it's also where our luck lies. And his is exalted in Cancer in his 11th house. The 11th house is the house of our wishes, but it's also the house of our gains. Or you could just call it your gross income. The 2nd house will be your net worth. The 11th house is how much money you got coming in. And man, his is, well, I think it's, what is it? I'm trying to think. His Jupiter, I have it written down right here. Let me see. Oh, its opposite is Neptune and Uranus. Ooh, man, let me tell you about this. First of all, with those right there, he just needs to learn how to keep it real with himself. But with this being in the 11th house, the first thing I want to tell you is his traditional values pay off well for him. He has old school values and people respect that. There's a certain way that he goes about things that people respect. But there's also this thing where his family are his closest associations. Even if him and his brother stay into it, his brother is his best friend. And he's looking out for his family. Not only his family, his people. And his people are going to look out for him. That's why his associations with Al Heyman and Errol Spence Jr. and Derek James and even Oscar De La Hoya in the beginning have paid off for him well. It's helped him prosper in his career. So that's something to pay attention to. Now, with this opposite to Uranus and Neptune, sometimes he gambles and takes things too far. And also, sometimes he's way too worried about the business and the money that he's making for him to really see how far his reach goes. there's that right there. Now, speaking of which, that brings us to Saturn. And his Saturn is at 25 degrees of Capricorn in the 6th house. And first of all, that points to me health issues that is about his bones. And he actually just got over a broken bone. He was scheduled to fight ThE, but he broke his hand. And he's had issues with his hand since then for like 2 years, so he's been out of action. Now, that could actually play to his disadvantage in this fight right here. Understand that. Because you don't want to come in with ring rust against Canelo Alvarez. Canelo is the top dog for a reason. All right. But with Saturn here, like I said, he's a hard worker. He's health conscious. He has an amazing work ethic. And he drives hard, maybe too hard. And he takes everything seriously. Now, that brings us to Uranus. And his Uranus is at 9 degrees of Capricorn in his 5th house. And that's interesting because that tells me what he does in his free time is try to come up with more business plans. Find different ways of succeeding. So when he's not doing his day job, he's nurturing other business endeavors. That's what he enjoys. And he doesn't relax very easily. But he is a true efficiency expert. He knows how to get the most done with the least amount of effort and energy involved. And that's genius in his own way. Now, Neptune is at 14 degrees of Capricorn in his 6th house. So once again, that points to possibly him having some health issues at some point in his life. So he's going to have to pay attention to that. But it also tells me he's naturally altruistic. But he's not going to help people unless he sees some type of way it's going to profit or benefit him. And over time, that's going to have to change. And it's only through spiritual evolving that that's going to go on for him. All right. And then that brings us to Pluto. And his Pluto is at 16 degrees of Scorpio in his 4th house, conjunct the black moon Lilith. And Pluto is our need for fundamental change. Pardon me, y'all. It's the deep underground part of us. And that's just worth mentioning because his is conjunct his black moon Lilith in the 4th house. So he's been through some crazy shit that he doesn't speak on. He could have even went through some type of abuse when he was a kid, him and his brother. And he keeps that inside of himself. And that is what drives him to change, but that's also what pushes him towards self-destruction sometimes. And that's also why he operates at such extremes and he feels everything so extremely. And that's also why he's always forever searching for stability. Yeah. It's like that. It can get crucial for him. They went through something that they keep secret when they were kids. Something in their parental home. And it doesn't mean that their parents had to do something to them. It was just something happened in that house. And not only has it hurt them, but it's also driven them to change. And then that brings us to his black moon Lilith, which is also in Scorpio, like I said, conjunct his Pluto at 21 degrees of Scorpio in his 4th house. So, he lived a chaotic life, and that made him not trust anybody. And he thinks everybody has ulterior motives. Why? Because he does. He does. Now, his North Node is at 11 degrees of Aquarius in his 6th house, which means his South Node is at 11 degrees of Leo in his 12th house. So he's here to be humbled. He's here to learn how to help people, how to serve humanity, how to develop his humanitarian instincts. He shined in many lifetimes before this, and he's shining in this lifetime, but he needs to figure out how to use that shine to help others. And that's interesting, seeing that he has a karmic debt 19. Matter of fact, him and Canelo both have karmic debt 19s. So they have abused power in previous lifetimes. So they're still powerful in this life, but they have to use their powers to heal, not hurt. And then his life path is a 7, which he's here to find his own individual truth. And that's interesting, seeing that he's a twin. And it's even cooler that his birthday number is a 1. So he has to develop himself, and he has to learn his own truth that's separate from his brother's. And his brother, being his twin, is going to have the same life path. So he has to find his own truth that's separate from his brother and develop himself. And that right there is an astrological portrait of Jermell, Iron Man Charlo. Now, that brings us to Saul Canelo Alvarez, or as the whole world knows him, Canelo. And if you don't know who Canelo is, the red-haired kid from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico, then you should. See, Canelo is the man. Canelo has been top 5 pound for pound since 2013. He has been a champion in 4 different weight classes. At junior middleweight or super welterweight, depending on what you want to call it, which is 154 pounds. At middleweight, which is 160 pounds. He is now the undisputed champion at super middleweight, which is 168 pounds. But he has also won a championship at light heavyweight, which is 175 pounds. He is 33 years old. He boasts a boxing record of 59 wins, 2 losses, and 2 draws, with 39 of those wins coming by knockout. The only losses he's had was in 2013 against Floyd Money Mayweather, and then about 18 months ago to Dimitri Bivol, when he dared to be great himself and move up and fight another champion in the light heavyweight division, where he was outclassed in both fights. I don't know who the first draw came to, but the second draw that he had was to Triple G, Gennady Golovkin. All right. Canelo is 5'8" tall. He has a 70.5" arm reach, and he walks around at about 175 pounds. All right. Sometimes 180, depending on the fight that he has coming up. But he fights right now at the 168 pound division. And he is a superstar across the world. All right. And he has been known as the face of boxing for over a decade. Well, not over a decade. Let's say since 2015, when Floyd Mayweather kind of stopped fighting prominently. Now, when it comes to his astrology, this is where it gets interesting. His sun is at 25 degrees of Cancer in his 10th house. So once again, the sun is ego and purpose. The 10th house is ambition, status, reputation. It could be representative of what we do for our career, public image. So, Charlo does it for money, right? Canelo's sun is in Cancer, so he does it for his family. And not just his immediate family, his whole country. All of Mexico is behind Canelo. Yeah. And then his sun is conjunct his Jupiter. So that's also why he's so blessed. That's also why he's so blessed. But it's opposite his Saturn and trine his Lilith. So he came from nothing. He came from nothing. And he feels responsible for making it better for a whole bunch of people. So that's why he does what he does. And that's why he does it so well. But with it trying the Black Moon Lilith in Scorpio in his second house, it's because he's fearful of poverty. He never wants to go there. And he'll do anything to keep himself from having to be in that position. Now, his moon is at 10 degrees of Gemini in his 8th house. So he's another 8th house moon. So he feels things extremely deeply. But he doesn't really experience his emotions directly. He'd rather talk around them or ignore them or distract himself from them. He thinks about his feelings way more than he actually feels them. But they're there and they're deep. And he's very clever. The environment that he's in is very important. And his moon is trying to his ascendant and sexed out to his Mercury. So overall, he's just a cool dude. He's an expert communicator. And he knows how to get along with anybody. And he's very versatile in his approach to that. All right. Now, his ascendant is at 12 degrees of Libra. So he's a pretty boy. He is a pretty boy. And his whole life is about achieving balance. And he needs to be a lot more straight up. For real. Because although he's polite, he's not necessarily kind-hearted. And then his Mercury is at 12 degrees of Leo in his 11th house. So, he is very intelligent, he is very intuitive, but he's also very hard-headed. And he only learns by himself. He ain't gonna listen to anything you say or anything anybody else says. And his Mercury is square to his Pluto. And my Mercury in Leo is square to my Pluto in Scorpio too. So I know he doesn't trust anything, one. And two, he's a perfectionist and he's compulsive. And that can stop him from being as efficient as he could be. And he doesn't want to do a job unless he can do it perfectly. And if he can't do it perfectly, he don't even want to fuck with it. And his money's going to fluctuate, but that's directly linked to his fluctuating thought process. But as long as he is thinking confident and he's in a confident mode of expression, then he's always going to be able to be in the top end of that profit earning. That's the 11th house, but that Leo, it gives it a quick boost. Now, his Venus is at 28 degrees of Gemini in his 9th house. So, you want me to say? Canelo's a hoe. We ain't gonna go into the logistics of it, but Canelo is a hoe. And I'm not saying all Venus and Geminis are, but he is. Whether he's married or not, he got a certain player to him. Yeah. He can't stand being bored. At all. Now, his Mars. And once again, Mars is our fighting style. It's our inherent sense of determination. It's our energy. It's how we move. His is in Taurus at 4 degrees of his 7th house. And what's funny about that is people do say he's flat-footed. So he's not as slick with it or as impressive with his footwork as Charlo might be, but he's also very solid and he's very powerful. And despite his smaller stature, he stays on a stable footing. And I can tell you, I don't think I've ever seen Canelo get dropped or knocked out or even knocked down. Which that's what dropped is, but yeah. Nah, he's gotten beat up. He's lost. But I don't think anybody's ever knocked him on his ass. And that speaks to how solid he is. And he's known for his power. But he is flat-footed. Now, his Mars is trying to Uranus. And so, that also tells me that He is very business savvy, with that being in the third house, and he is always worried about how much money he's being made. And that's what motivates him to fight. And that's why he is the cash cow of boxing. People don't want to fight Canelo because they think they can whoop his ass. They want to fight Canelo because that's going to be their biggest payday they've ever had. And they need that. For real. They need that. Now, Jupiter is at 23 degrees of Cancer in his 10th house. So once again, and it's conjunct his sun. That just tells you that he has the whole country of Mexico behind him. And he's blessed in that way. And his career is going to flourish because of that. And his country is going to prosper because he flourishes in his career. So they help each other. And he's old school. He has old school values. And people respect that about him. Now, his Saturn is at 21 degrees of Capricorn in his 4th house. So once again, he comes from nothing. And he's always been responsible for his family. He discovered at a very early age that he had this skill or this talent. And so he had to take it seriously. And he had to be structured with it. Because he was responsible for making his family have a better life. And that hasn't always been fair to him, but it's there. Now, his Uranus is at 6 degrees of Capricorn in his 3rd house. So he is very business savvy. He's genius in that way. Very, very, very cool with his legislative and administrative skills. He's a boss. And he has a boss mindset. Now, his Neptune is at 12 degrees of Capricorn in his 4th house. And his sextile to his Pluto. So because of the way that he was raised, he's not always willing to help everybody. He can be stingy and he can be keeping a lot to himself because he doesn't know if he's going to have enough for later. But as he goes through a process of change, he realized that doesn't matter. It's the fulfillment that he gets through it all that allows him to help people, not the prosperity that he achieves or the recognition that he gets in doing everything he does. Now, his Pluto is at 14 degrees of Scorpio in his 2nd house. So once again, he comes from poverty. This is a rags to riches story. But it could also go from riches to rags again if he's not careful. But the thing is, he's realized, since he's got all this money, that it's just a paper tiger. It's just a paper tiger. Now, his Lilith is at 28 degrees of Scorpio in his 2nd house. And that tells me he's done some things for money that he's not proud of. He's terrified of poverty. And there are some things he will never repeat again that he's done in order to keep himself from going back to that place that really fuck with him. And it also tells me you can't trust him in a business deal. Because he always has ulterior motives. Now, his midheaven is at 12 degrees of Cancer. So that just tells me that, once again, it's for his country and his family. And there's so much more he could do. But he would rather stick to what he knows. That's his comfort zone. And that also keeps them taken care of. Now, his North Node is at 7 degrees of Aquarius in his 4th house. Which means his South Node is at 7 degrees of Leo in his 10th house. So once again, his is a little bit different from Charlo, but close to the same. He needs to learn how to help and be there for his family and find different ways for him to get in touch with himself through his help that he does for other people, instead of being so caught up in the expectations that other people have of him and living a facade. He becomes his original self when he's helping. When he's living into that image and he's being Canelo, sometimes he's faking the front, and that doesn't help anybody. All right. And he also has a karmic debt 19, so he's also here to be humbled. But his life path is an 8 with a 9 vibration. So he's here to be a boss. He's here to really take control of his life, but he's here to take control of his life so he can help other people. He's being given so much so he can figure out how he can serve. Now, that concludes the astrological portrait of Canelo Alvarez. And so before I get into the night in question, I do want to say that after close assessment, I do believe that Canelo has the stronger chart for a fighter. And it's just for the simple fact that Charlo's moon and Mars in Pisces, even though they're conjunct and they make him brave, they can make him care too much and make him too compassionate, and that can confuse him. And Canelo's moon in Gemini ain't like that, even in the 8th house. And his Mars is in Taurus. So he can stay calm and do whatever he needs to do regardless. He just stays patient and goes to work. So Canelo does have the slightly stronger chart for a fighter. Now, when it comes to the night in question, which happens to be this Saturday, September 30th, 2023, we're going to look at the transits that are going down. And as we look at each one, we're going to see what's aspecting who. And we'll say advantage Canelo or advantage Charlo. And by the time we're done, we'll have a little point system put in place. All right? So, starting with the sun. The sun will be at 7 degrees of Libra on the night of the fight. And that means it will be trine to Canelo's moon and north node and square his Uranus. While it is square to Charlo's Jupiter and Uranus. So, with the trines going on for Canelo, that gives Canelo the advantage. So, advantage Canelo, 1 point for Canelo. And then when it comes to the moon, at the time of the fight, the moon will be sitting at 1 degrees of Taurus. So, that will be conjunct Canelo's Mars, and it won't be aspecting anything for Charlo. Well, the moon is exalted in Taurus. So with that conjunct to Canelo's Mars, helping him stay calm and stay brave and handle his business, that gives the advantage to Canelo. So, 2 points for Canelo. Now, when it comes to Mercury, Mercury will be sitting at 23 degrees of Virgo at the time of the fight. So that will be sextile to Canelo's Sun and Jupiter, but opposite to Charlo's moon and Mars, trine his Saturn, and sextile to his Lilith. So, with that sextile between Canelo's Sun and Jupiter, but that opposition between Charlo's moon and Mars, that gives another advantage to Canelo. So, 3 points for Canelo. Now, when it comes to Venus, it's not really helping or hurting anybody in the equation. So, it's a non-factor. But with Mars, and Mars is going to be one of the most important things here. Mars is square to Canelo's Sun, Jupiter, and Saturn, while it's square to Charlo's Saturn, but opposite his Venus. So it's not really good for either one of them, but it's not quite as bad for Charlo. So that's a slight point for Charlo. So that's 1 point for Charlo. 3-1 Canelo to Charlo, which brings us to Jupiter. And Jupiter is luck. So, Jupiter is square to Canelo's Mercury, opposite his Pluto, but sextile his midheaven. Now, it is square Charlo's ascendant, trine his Neptune, sextile his Jupiter, and opposite his Pluto. And I would say that evens out. So luck is not going to be a factor here. It's influencing them both in different ways. So they're both going to come out blessed after this, but it might not be in the ways that are expected. Now, with Saturn. Saturn is sextile to Canelo's Mars and Uranus, but it's not aspecting anything for Charlo. So, I would say advantage Charlo. If Saturn is making an aspect, even a harmonious aspect, it could be hampering things down. And with it hampering down Canelo's Mars and Uranus, it could be slowing him down in a way. But it could also help him in the long run. But I'm going to say advantage Charlo. So, 4-2, Canelo to Charlo. All right. Now, that brings us to Uranus. And Uranus is the unexpected. All right. And Uranus is sextile to Canelo's Sun and Jupiter and trine to his Saturn. But it's conjunct to Charlo's Sun, sextile his Moon and Mars, trine his Saturn, and opposite his Lilith. And if you're looking at Uranus, I would say if anything more unexpected is to happen, that would be in the favor of Charlo. And with Charlo having more aspects here and it being conjunct his Sun, that would say advantage Charlo. It's only slight, but it's advantage Charlo. Now, that brings us to Neptune. And Neptune is the culture, but it's also the spirituality in the mix, the divine. So Neptune, and it can be confusion too. Don't get that twisted. Neptune is trine Canelo's Sun and Jupiter, sextile his Saturn, square his Venus, and trine his Lilith. Whereas it is sextile to Charlo's Sun and Saturn, conjunct his Moon and Mars, and trine his Lilith. So I would say small advantage Charlo. Small advantage Charlo. All right. Now with Pluto. And Pluto is the need for fundamental change. And it can be empowerment, but it could also be destruction. So Pluto is opposite Canelo's Sun and trine his Lilith, but trine Charlo's Sun and conjunct his Saturn. So that is a definite advantage for Charlo. Yeah. Now, with the Black Moon Lilith. And the Black Moon Lilith can be the shadow aspect. It could even be bad luck here, if you want to look at it from a transit perspective. It is sextile to Canelo's Venus and square his Lilith, but it's square to Charlo's Sun. So that is an advantage for Canelo because I could see him winning with that and then him having problems with his marriage, having problems with his family, him having more money issues. But with Charlo, not only could this mess up his money issues because he lost, but it could also hurt his ego and affect his self-worth. Now, the last thing we're going to look at is the North Node. And this is about destiny. All right? And the North Node is square Canelo's Sun and his Jupiter and his Saturn, but it's just square Charlo's Saturn. So, that is probably advantage Canelo. Because with it affecting his Sun and Jupiter and Saturn. No, now that I think about it, that's advantage because it's doing a square to both of their Saturns, but it's only affecting Charlo's Saturn. So that's advantage Charlo. So, after looking at our point system, that makes it 6-5 Canelo over Charlo. So not only does Canelo have the stronger chart for a fighter, but in my professional opinion, the stars also favor him more for the night. Now, I am rooting for Jermell Charlo. I want him to win, especially now that I know he's a Pisces moon too. My heart is with Jermell Charlo, but my money would be with Canelo Alvarez. And that's some priceless knowledge in itself. And this has been some priceless knowledge of self. And if any of y'all are interested in any astrological readings, don't get at me in my comments. No. Get at me in my email, which is mr.turner1300@gmail.com. And I have a whole plethora of services that I offer. And it's all about empowering you. Now, just remember, no matter what you have going on, we all have all of this energy available to us. What you do with it is what you do with it. And even beyond that, it's not about what you do. It's about how you do it. And that's some priceless knowledge in itself. And this has been some priceless knowledge of self. This concludes my astrological breakdown of the fight for the undisputed super middleweight championship of the world between Jermell Iron Man Charlo, who happens to be the undisputed junior middleweight champion, and Saul Canelo Alvarez, the super middleweight champion of the world. We out.